there, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. Well, you've joined me here in a Scottish oak woodland on the west coast. It's about 10:30 in the morning. It's about 3.5 to 4 hours after the sun has risen. And over this video and the next few videos that we're going to be posting here on the Expressive Photography YouTube channel, I'm going to be addressing pretty much the most important question that we have as landscape photographers, which is landscape photography really all about the light? So of course, before we really get started, we have to just be very careful with our definition of light here really, because what we're really looking at here is photography, and photography literally means to paint with light from the Greek. However, what I think most of us appreciate is that when photographers are talking about all about the light, they're really talking about the degree of light or the quality of light. We hear these expressions all the time: great light, epic light, magnificent light, superb light, monumental light, and conversely, rubbish light, crappy light, flat light, dull light, boring light. And these definitions are the absolute fundamental core of not just the question, but the answer. So what I hope to show in this video, and the ones that are going to come after it over the next week or two, is that the quality of the light can dictate the type of photographs that we can make, but only if we are open and willing to accept that our expectation or definition of what good photographic light means is open to interpretation, and we might just be wrong in terms of what we are thinking. Here at Expressive Photography, it's always been one of the most important things for me as an educator and as a photographer myself, is to be happy and to enjoy what I'm doing. Now, the reason I'm out here at 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning is because I had 4 hours of work to do when I got up this morning, answering emails, tracking books, dealing with admin and things like that, getting my business moving and dealing with things that had come in overnight. These are the realities of my life in terms of my photography. So when I'm out, the first and most important thing is that I'm not in the office, I'm not doing admin, I'm not answering email, and I don't want to be evaluating my experience here in the landscape based on my expectation of the light. I think one of the first challenges in photography, or one of the starting points of photography, is to evaluate the quality of the light. So like I've already said, the time that I'm recording this is sort of mid-morning, about an hour from noon actually, and I have the sun now directly in my face. And what that means is I'm being evenly lit, as is the background behind me. We can notice that there are some deep shadows being cast by the trees, but generally, with everything being evenly lit, there is an overall reduction in contrast. If, however, with the sun slightly over my left shoulder here and the sun sweeping across the landscape in this direction, there is much greater contrast, because some of the mossy rocks and trees behind me and around me are in the shadow and some are in the light. And what that means is that we now have a contrast between lit surfaces and shadowy surfaces. And as you may know from following my work or reading some of my ebooks, in particular luminosity and contrast, landscape photography starts with luminosity and contrast. Now, what we have to evaluate next is, are the colours in the landscape helpful and harmonious, or are they distracting and dull and maybe disinteresting? These, of course, are evaluations. Some of us might just think that this landscape looks perfectly well on its own. So let's explore this area now with my camera and see what type of photographs we can create in what many people would call suboptimal light, given that there's barely a cloud in the sky and everything is dry and not very saturated. So let's just have a wee look and to see what tools we have at our disposal right in here and right now to maybe create some interesting photographs and what we can do to make them the best we possibly can. So one of the first things to notice is that the light is actually very, very harsh. A descriptive word there which I'm just throwing in for reference. Very bright, and when you're shooting into it you're squinting quite a lot. So the light is really pretty powerful. What I've chosen to do here is I've always been a great advocate of pointing my camera at the things that I notice, and I am noticing some very lovely, these beautiful mossy boulders that were dumped here by a glacier about 11,000 years ago and have just grown these wonderful mosses since. But looking into the light here, there's a tree that's very, very quite characteristic, characterful is the word I guess I'm looking for. It's got quite a nice shape to it. But the very, very first thing I've done is I've actually put my camera into black and white preview mode. Now, I covered this in a video up here a month or so ago, and it was a really popular video because it's an eye-opener, it's a real game changer. And I would say that if you're in light that you somehow don't feel inspired by, put your camera in black and white preview mode. And what that's allowed me to do is abstract the world around me. So you're no longer looking at a reality, you're looking at something that is a product in the camera. And this is one of the great things about photography, is we're not just limited to the world that we see and perceive around us. We can use cameras that see the world in a different way. Black and white preview modes is of course one of them. Aspect ratios is another one. Ways to change what we're seeing to eliminate an awful lot of the things that make the world sometimes feel a little bit average or maybe a little bit boring. And you know, I haven't tried to make this perfect. It's really, there are trees in front, there are bits and bobs of things kind of getting in the way, or are they? Or are they just part of that composition? So I'm going to have a look at this one on the back of the camera, see what it is about it that I like, and then I'll show you the finished photographs when I'm back in the studio. Now, just looking at the back of the camera here, and I appreciate this is a bit suboptimal for recording, I bumped the ISO up to 400 and stopped it down to f9. I don't want the background to be too sharp, but I do want the tree to be sharp. So I'm trying to eliminate some of the background information. Also, I'm wanting to try and get a reasonably high shutter speed, 1/320th of a second. There is a bit of a breeze, and I don't want the movement of the branches, the smaller branches, to really impact the kind of feeling that it's a very static scene, but made quite dynamic by the beautiful shape of the actual trunk. The trunk and the branches, I think, are creating a really interesting kind of dynamic through the frame. Well, one of the things for sure is that now it's noon, the light isn't getting any softer. But when I wrote my ebook Luminosity and Contrast, which is nearly 8 years ago now, 7 years ago perhaps, I was so certain that I was onto something with the things that make us point our cameras at things. And they were, of course, luminosity, contrast, colour being a huge trigger for us, geometry and the arrangement of things and the shapes and patterns and lines of things, and finally atmosphere. Now, there isn't a huge amount of atmosphere here today. There's no fog, there's no mist, there's no rain or snow, there's no flowing water. We're in a very static landscape. So if photography was all about the light, we would say that out here at noon, you know, most of us, well, many people out there are going to say that that's suboptimal light, it's not great light. But what is happening here this morning is that we have backlit birch trees, and each of these branches is a little tiny patch of light. So one of the things I've always advocated is that If you photograph what is there, if you photograph what catches your imagination and you notice, then you're in a much better possibility of making good photographs, or certainly photographs that you like. Now, what I'm really attracted to here now is every single one of these birch branches is a little highlighted point of light, a line, a graphic shape. And what I'm doing here with my 45 to 100mm lens is zooming right in, opening up the aperture, so a shallow depth of field, reducing the focus at the back so that we have more blur, more bokeh, and that is introducing the sense of atmosphere, and it becomes a stage on which those light lines and branches can perform on. So what we're doing is we're creating a textural contrast by using the camera to change reality, to create a shallow depth of field, to create a platform for light to perform on. And I'm fairly certain when we get back to the computer, we'll be able to process this in a way that will accentuate and highlight those highlights and these geometric highlights. So the quality of the light isn't important, it's the way the light is changing the landscape so that it speaks to you in a different way. So I'm making photographs here this morning that I couldn't make if it was cloudy, if it was foggy, if it was raining. But I'm out of my office, I'm having a great time, I'm being creative, I'm being engaged with the landscape, I'm seeing things that excite me, and I'm pointing my camera at them. And that is the expressive photography message. If you come out with the expectation of fantastic light or fog or atmosphere or all of these unicorns and rainbows that seem to be so popular on social media these days, then you will more often than not be disappointed, and you might as well be back in your office or sat in front of the sofa watching the football with a beer. We're out here in nature to be in nature, and the quality of the light is going to allow us to see and interact with the landscape in a way that we can only do now. So in this first video of this series, I think it's worth just having a little bit of a recap of some of the things that hopefully I've managed to demonstrate. First and foremost is that when we have opportunities to get out into the landscape, I believe we should take them. And whatever we are confronted with or what we are met with when we get there is very much out of our control. Even if we plan and try and predict or only go out when we think it's going to be good, I think that's a bit of a shame. I would always rather be outside than inside. That's just the way I am. But what we can do to try and maximise our productivity when we're out, which I think is really what this video is all about, or what many of you are trying to do, is to maximise the time that you have out in the field. The first thing we can do is evaluate the light. Look at the direction of the light. If you can only get there at noon, then that's the light you're going to get. There's no point in worrying about golden light or all sorts of fancy stuff. The light you've got is what you have to work with, and that is what you should be evaluating. Now, I've been out here now for about 2.5 hours, and so it's 1 o'clock or 1:30 now at lunchtime. And what I've been doing is just noticing what catches my eye. So I've evaluated the light, I understand the directionality of it. And right at the beginning of this video, I did talk about shooting with the light, or shooting across the light, or shooting into the light. And they're really 3 really powerful ways of examining our relationship with the quality of the light. We don't always have to show the source, we can only show the effect. So that means the way the shadows are, the way the contrast is, the looking into the light and having that very sort of silhouetted or backlit effect. There's all sorts of different ways that we can deal with the available light, but first of all we need to have an assessment of what the quality of that light is. The second thing we can do is use a black and white preview. If the colours in the scene don't strike you as inspiring or moving, then put your camera into a black and white preview and instantly you're seeing the world through a different pair of eyes. That in its own right is going to maximise your relationship with what most people would call harsh light. Black and white photography does not rely upon colour to excite and energise the viewer or to impress the viewer. What we can do instead with black and white is focus on contrast, and one of the attributes of what people would call harsh light or midday light or less than optimal light, whatever, most of the time it's high contrast. So using that contrast in a black and white composition, and I've shown quite a few photographs in this video using high contrast light because that's what I have today, not just the ones I've made during this video. And finally, understanding that contrast doesn't always mean tonal contrast. It can mean colour contrast. This last scene I've got behind me is quite an interesting one where everything is very evenly lit. There's not a huge amount of tonal contrast, but there is some quite nice graphical and dynamic colour contrast. So working with what is there and using our craft and skill and understanding of composition and how to use the available elements, I believe we can still achieve two things. One is to come into the landscape and engage with it and have a good time. And as I've said so many times in previous videos, that is always a win. Being out here, noticing cool stuff and pointing our cameras at it is the best thing we can ever do. The byproduct of that is that we're more likely to make photographs that we are interested in. And that is a deep sense of satisfaction at what is here rather than what we wish was here. Leaving this morning thinking, well, there was no fog, there was no mist, there was no rainbows, there was no atmosphere, there was no God beams, there was no whatever, and wandering home and just telling my wife that I've just had a dreadful time and I wish I'd stayed at home, I think that is the saddest possible outcome of any day in the landscape if you call yourself a landscape photographer. There are going to be more videos in this series. I'm going to be looking at all sorts of different light, all the different ways that we can maximize our opportunities, whatever the light is, be it dynamic and dramatic, or indeed what most people would call flat and boring and uninspiring. As I have mentioned in the Luminosity and Contrast ebook, the Colour of Meaning ebook and the Creativity Superpowers ebook, they are the 3 user manuals for engaging with the world in a better and more meaningful way. It's not about rules, it's not about following somebody else's mantras or scripts on how to be creative. It's how you can learn the skills that you need to be the best version of yourself with a camera in the landscape. I quite often think it's not really about the quality of the light that has the most impact on our photography, it's the quality of our thoughts. And as I've said before in previous videos, I think I've got a really good attitude, and just being here with my camera in the fresh air, seeing spring unfold in front of me is a really beautiful thing to do. Thank you very much for watching. As per, if you do love the content, then please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and all of that jazz. And please do check out our ebook store, and also if you would love to come and learn expressive photography face to face with myself and some of the other people who I tend to run workshops with, be that Adam Gibbs or Alex Noriega or John Barclay, then please jump onto the website, subscribe to our newsletter, and perhaps we'll get to see you in the field one of these days and share some beautiful moments together. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.